Even some Republicans and even some within Trump's inner circle are trying to clamp down on the egregious number of presidential pardons he's issued during his term so far, including pardoning criminals, people accused of drug trafficking, and other offenses. It's another example of Trump's outrageous policies and decision making, alienating even those closest to him within the party. New bipartisan legislation is attempting to curb the number of presidential pardons that any president, not just Trump, can issue while in office, because it would create an easier pathway for members of Congress to overturn some controversial pardons. The Democratic representative who introduced this bill, Representative Johnny Olszewski from Maryland, had several things to say about how Trump has abused his ability to offer pardons.
Assault. None of us should accept it as normal practice that a president, any president, use their executive pardon power to absolve convicted drug kingpins, those found guilty of violently attacking law enforcement officers, and even a money laundering crypto magnate with ties to the president's family business. Yet, this is exactly what President Trump has done. On his first day back in office, President Trump pardoned 1,500 people involved in the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Since then, he's pardoned or commuted the sentences of nearly 90 others. Just recently, he added former Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez to that list. Hernandez was serving a 45-year prison sentence for conspiring to smuggle more than 400 tons or 4.5 billion doses of cocaine into the U.S. Hernandez was also convicted of accepting bribes from violent drug cartel members to fuel his political career, shielding them from prosecution in exchange for their bribes. And earlier this year, President Trump granted clemency to a drug dealer responsible for putting more than 1,000 kilograms of cocaine onto Baltimore's streets. A federal agent described the defendant as, quote, one of the largest cocaine and heroin dealers to be arrested by DEA in recent history. President Trump is using the pardon power not to correct injustices, but to absolve convicted criminals simply because he can. He has yet to offer a compelling reason for any of these clemency cases. These abuses are especially pronounced under this administration, but they are certainly not unique to one party. Throughout history, Democratic and Republican presidents have used clemency to reward allies and shield those close to them. After the Civil War, President Johnson issued sweeping pardons for more than 13,000 former Confederates. President Clinton pardoned his half-brother, who was also serving time for drug trafficking. President Biden pardoned his son, who was convicted on gun charges and who had pleaded guilty to tax-related charges. Some presidents, including Presidents Trump and Biden, have issued preemptive pardons before prosecutors even had a chance to present their case in court and before the public had any opportunity to weigh the facts. It has to stop.
Representative Olszewski lays out a compelling argument for why the power of presidential pardons needs to be checked. It's exemplified by the Trump administration and Trump's egregious number of pardons for convicted criminals, but it also applies to other presidents who have used the pardon power for personal reasons. And one Republican in Congress has already firmly signed on as co sponsor of this bill. That's Representative Don Bacon, a Republican from Nebraska. Like a lot of Republicans who are challenging Trump right now, or maybe challenging him in the near future, Bacon isn't seeking re-election. That gives him more leverage to do things that might enrage Donald Trump. And he said, presidential pardons are an important constitutional authority, but like all powers held by the executive branch, these authorities benefit from the appropriate checks and balances the Constitution envisioned. Across multiple administrations, we've seen legitimate questions raised about how this authority has been used at the same time the ability of Congress to provide oversight has weakened. He said, frankly, it is clear to me the pardon authority has been abused. I'm pleased to co sponsor this Pardon Integrity Act, a constitutional amendment that establishes a narrow, common sense guardrail that preserves the pardon power while ensuring Congress can fulfill its constitutional role to provide accountability and uphold the rule of law. Now, going back to some of Trump's most controversial pardons this term around, as Olszewski pointed out in his speech, Trump has pardoned convicted drug kingpins, people who have been found guilty of violently attacking law enforcement officers. Those were the January 6 rioters. and even a money laundering crypto magnate with ties to the president's family business. More on that in a minute. These pardons undermine so many of the controversial policies and actions that the Trump administration has taken this turnaround. For example, invading Venezuela and kidnapping its president over supposed drug crimes and providing drugs to Americans, as well as those extrajudicial murders of people on boats. All of that was supposedly done to stop drugs from coming into the United States, which has very little evidence or legal backing, which in some cases has zero evidence whatsoever, and overall has very little legal or constitutional backing to ensure that this was actually done appropriately. But the fact that Trump is pardoning these people who have actually been convicted of drug offenses completely undermines his reasoning in all of these other cases of extrajudicial actions. He doesn't have the constitutional right to do these things, and clearly his reasoning has nothing to do with keeping Americans safe or eradicating drugs. Not to mention, pardoning all of these criminals at the exact same time that ICE's brutal occupation of American cities is predicated on the idea that they're eradicating criminals from American streets. Trump is the one putting criminals back on the streets. When it comes to the January 6th insurrectionists who Trump pardoned, many of them were actually accused of other crimes that they're able to get away with because of these pardons. And some of them have already gone on to commit other crimes after being pardoned. This Citizens for Ethics report from December found that at least 33 January 6th insurrectionists pardoned by Trump have already been rearrested, charged, or sentenced for other crimes since January 6th, 2021. Four pardoned insurrectionists have allegedly reoffended since receiving their pardons. Several have argued that the pardon should cover unrelated criminal convictions. And in one case last month, Trump explicitly repardoned one insurrectionist for his unrelated weapons charge. These crimes include things like child sex crimes, ranging from sexual assault to possession of child pornography. At least five were charged with illegal possession of weapons, including at least two who had a previous domestic violence conviction. Five were arrested or charged with driving while impaired or under the influence. In two of these cases, the defendant's reckless driving resulted in a fatality. Two of them were charged with rape. Trump and members of the Department of Homeland Security constantly claim that they're pulling people off the streets and deporting the worst of the worst. But the stark reality is that the Trump administration and Trump himself are directly responsible for putting the worst of the worst right back onto the streets. People who have committed the most heinous crimes against children, people who have killed others with their recklessness, people who have been accused of sexual assault. There's undeniable parallels to the way that the Trump administration is simultaneously mishandling the Epstein files, which is causing other members of Trump's party to break ranks with him at the exact same time. This is a breaking point in terms of the unbridled hypocrisy at the heart of the Trump administration and so many of its policies. And it's not just Republicans in Congress or members of the opposition party who are pointing this out. Even people within Trump's inner circle are concerned. The Daily Beast reported this week that the White House is scrambling to rein in felon Trump's pardons. Reportedly, the White House Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, as well as other members of senior leadership, are alarmed by the optics and chaos of the president's pardon process. So much so that they've, quote, iced out his presidential pardon czar, Alice Johnson. Now, Alice Johnson is famous for being pardoned by Trump in 2020 after efforts from advocates, including Kim Kardashian, who was famously pictured in the Oval Office with a smiling Trump. Johnson was sentenced to prison for life in 1996 for a first-time nonviolent drug conviction, and she spent more than 2 decades behind bars. Today, she's a 70-year-old grandmother and a criminal justice reform advocate who's supposed to help streamline the criminal pardon process for the Trump administration. Essentially, she's supposed to give Trump insight and information about who he should pardon. But as is the case with a lot of things happening in the Trump White House, this seemingly has turned into more of a pay-for-play scam. Specifically, the Daily Beast reports that federal lobbyists have reportedly earned millions of dollars over just the past year from criminals who are seeking pardons or clemency from Trump. In some cases, Trump's staffers have had to pull pardons at the 11th hour after officials determined recipients stood to directly profit from them. But one source said, at this point, Trump really doesn't give a shit about public reactions to his pardons. So essentially, the way that this is working is that criminals who have an obvious interest in being pardoned by the president are paying these lobbyists enormous amounts of money. Then the lobbyists are working with Alice Johnson, the 70-year-old grandmother who's been appointed to this position, and she's going to Trump, and Trump is just signing these pardons in many cases without any idea who he's pardoning, what they did, or why. Case in point. Trump pardoned the founder of crypto exchange Binance after that founder pleaded guilty to money laundering that allowed criminal groups to move money connected to drug trafficking and child abuse. And when Trump was asked about that pardon, he claimed he had no idea who this guy even was. I don't know who he is, Trump said. I know he got a 4-month sentence or something like that, and I heard it was a Biden witch hunt. Interestingly enough, this October pardon came just months after Binance struck a $2 billion partnership deal with the Trump family's crypto venture, World Liberty Financial, which they have profited handsomely from over the past year. The White House press secretary Caroline Leavitt claims that when it comes to pardons, the White House takes them with the utmost seriousness and that the president understands the responsibility he has to issue pardons to individuals who are seeking them. That's why, she claimed, we have a very thorough review process here that moves with the Department of Justice and the White House counsel's office. Oh, yeah, the same Department of Justice and White House counsel that has kept the Epstein files from the public and redacted the names of perpetrators who are accused of serious criminal offenses against children. That Department of Justice, I'm sure they're incredibly trustworthy in all of these pardon cases. And that was sarcasm, if you couldn't pick up what I'm putting down. At the end of the day, we have several clear patterns on display here. The Trump administration and Donald Trump himself repeatedly claim that their unpopular policies and extrajudicial actions are to keep Americans safe. But at the exact same time, they're endangering countless Americans by pardoning, in some cases, violent criminals, allowing them back on the streets to reoffend, which sounds strangely familiar to the rationale for deporting, brutalizing, and illegally detaining both immigrants and American citizens. You can't have it both ways, but the Trump administration is trying to the extent that they're now alienating members of their own party and even some of the people closest to Trump. As is often the case with the Trump administration, the hypocrisy here is the point. Trump loves the fact that the rules he creates don't even apply to him, and that they do apply to people who are less privileged than he is. But it's yet another sign that the Trump administration is already reaching a breaking point where the hypocrisy is on full display and even members of his own party can't take it anymore. This, again, is another sign that the midterms are not going to go Trump's way. As members of his administration fear, the optics are just too bad. And the people affected by these presidential pardons range from people around the country to some of the most high profile individuals sounding the alarm. So Trump may continue pardoning people, but he's also going to have to pay a price.